My name is Barbara, and I never imagined that a broken window would change the rhythm of my life. But that's exactly what happened the night my neighbor William stepped into my world with his steady hands and quiet strength. What started as a small act of kindness opened the door to something I didn't expect, something that made me question how connections form when two people least expect it. I'll share it all with you. But first, let me ask, from which cities are you watching this story today? I love knowing where everyone is listening from. It all began one crisp autumn evening. The wind had been howling through the trees all afternoon, rattling the shutters and shaking the house like it wanted to remind me that winter wasn't far away. I had just finished dinner, and the clatter of the dishes in the sink was still echoing when I heard the sharp crack. At first, I thought it was just a branch, but when I went into the living room, my heart sank. The window near the corner had given in, one pane shattered, leaving a cold draught spilling across the room. I stood there, clutching the edges of my cardigan, and wondered what to do. I've lived alone for years since my husband passed, and though I've gotten used to solving problems myself, that broken glass felt bigger than me. My thoughts ran in circles. Who could I call at this hour? The repair shop wouldn't be open until morning. Just then, there was a knock at my door. I froze. Who could it be at this time of night? When I opened it, there he was, William, my neighbor from across the street. We'd exchanged polite greetings over the years, the kind you offer in passing. A wave when picking up the mail, a nod when carrying in groceries. He was in his early 60s, tall, broad-shouldered, with that kind of calm presence that made you feel like storms wouldn't dare trouble him. "Barbara," he said gently, his deep voice cutting through the wind, "I saw your light flicker and thought something might be wrong." Did I hear glass break? I stepped aside and let him in, a little embarrassed but oddly relieved. Yes, the window gave out. I'm not sure what to do until morning. He looked at the jagged edges of the frame, his brow furrowed with concentration. "I've got some boards and tools in the garage. I can patch it up so you won't freeze tonight." I hesitated for only a second before nodding. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." As he worked, I watched. His hands were steady, sure, practiced, like someone who had fixed more than his share of broken things. He moved with an ease I admired, not rushing, not fumbling, just patient and methodical. I found myself studying the way the light from my lamp caught the gray at his temples, the way his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms dusted with age and work. We didn't talk much at first, only in little bursts, where the boards were going, how the nails should be set. But then, as the hammering slowed, and the space filled with a softer quiet, we began to share small things. He told me how long he'd lived in the neighborhood, how he used to build cabinets when he was younger. I told him about my love for gardening, how I still tried to keep roses blooming no matter the season. When the window was covered, the draft gone, he stepped back and nodded with satisfaction. "That should hold until you can get it fixed properly." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "You have no idea how much I appreciate this, William." He smiled, faintly but warmly. "It's nothing. No one should feel alone when things like this happen." That sentence stayed with me long after he left. No one should feel alone. It echoed in my chest while I made us tea, while I glanced out the patched window, while I sat in the chair with the soft ticking of the clock filling the room. The next day, he stopped by again. He wanted to check if the boards were holding. I insisted he come in, and soon enough, we were sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, laughing over little stories, like how my cat once got stuck on the roof, or how he once tried to fix a neighbor's washing machine and ended up flooding the basement. His laugh was low, rumbling, the kind of sound that made you smile without realizing it. What surprised me most was how comfortable it felt. It had been so long since I'd shared real conversation with someone face to face, someone who listened and cared about the answers. The loneliness I had grown accustomed to didn't feel so heavy when William was across the table. Over the next week, he helped me replace the window. I thought I'd pay someone, but he insisted on handling it. He said, "Barbara, sometimes neighbors are meant for more than waving from across the street. Let me do this for you." And I let him. It was during those days, with the scent of sawdust and the sound of steady hands working in my home, that something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. It was quiet, subtle. A warmth that grew between us like a candle slowly burning brighter. One afternoon, when the last piece of the window was set in place, I brought out a plate of cookies I'd baked. He sat down, dusted off his hands, and for the first time, he really looked at me. His gaze lingered, not just polite or casual, but searching. And in that moment, my heart skipped in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Barbara," he said softly, "you don't deserve to be alone in this big house all the time." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling slightly on the edge of the plate. Sometimes it feels that way. But sometimes I wonder if life has more to offer, even now. His eyes met mine, steady and warm. It does. You just have to let it. That night, the silence in my house felt different. Not empty, but full of possibility. When I closed the curtains over the new window, I knew something had begun, something fragile but real. And just a few nights later, when circumstances led us to step beyond neighbors, beyond polite friendship, into something unexpected, that was when the story truly took a turn I could never have predicted. One phone call, one wet carpet, and a vacancy sign blinking like a heartbeat on the highway. By sunrise, I knew this night would change how I looked at myself and at William. Not with fireworks, with an honesty I hadn't dared invite into my life in years. The trouble started with a soft hissing sound in the wall behind my laundry room. I had just finished folding towels when I heard it, then hard pop, as if the plumbing had taken a deep breath and exhaled wrong. By the time I reached the hallway, cold water was blooming across the baseboards and slipping under the rug, turning the floor into a dark, slow-moving river. I did the only thing I could think to do. I called William. He didn't ask questions. He said, "I'm coming," and I believed him. 5 minutes later, he was at my door with a toolbox and a coil of something that looked like a silver snake. He found the shutoff, twisted the valve with a grunt, and the house fell oddly quiet, just the steady drip from the wall and the soft thump of my own pulse. We stood in it together. The kind of mess that makes you feel small and tired, and a little foolish for ever thinking you had everything under control. "We can't dry this out tonight," he said, studying the buckled laminate. "You shouldn't stay here with the power outlets near the floor. Let me put you up somewhere." "I can drive myself," I said out of habit. I sharpened independence into muscle memory. But then I saw the way his eyes softened, not pitying, not possessive, just concerned. "Still," I added, softer, "I wouldn't mind the company." He called a small hotel off the interstate, the one with the looping willow out front and the blue sign you can see from the exit. "1 room left," the clerk told him. 2 queens. William covered the receiver with his palm and looked at me. I looked back for a long moment, hearing the drip, drip, drip like a metronome for a decision. 2 beds, I said. "Book it." We packed quickly. I tossed a sweater, a soft pair of slacks, my toiletry bag, and the book I'd been pretending to read into a tote. He insisted on carrying it to his truck, where the cab smelled faintly of cedar and a life well used. The storm that had bullied my window last week had returned as a low, steady rain, The wipers kept time like a tired drummer. Neither of us spoke much. There is a kind of talk that matters more before it's said. We were saving it. The lobby was all lemon cleaner and the hum of a soda machine. The night clerk gave us a single key card and a smile that said she'd seen 1,000 stories and learned not to assume the ending of even one. Our room had a view of the willow tree and the glow of the parking lot lights pooling like small moons on the asphalt. The radiator ticked. The ice bucket had a hairline crack. There were 2 beds made up crisp and square. It felt like stepping onto the plane of a truce. Nothing demanded of us but truth. "Hungry?" he asked. The hotel restaurant had closed, but the clerk pointed us to a diner that kept late hours for travelers and the lonely. 10 minutes later we were in a vinyl booth, steam lifting from 2 bowls of chicken noodle soup as if blessing the air. He told me about the years he spent building cabinets, the way wood settles and remembers where it came from. "You can't force it," he said, turning his spoon slowly. "You listen, and it tells you the shape it wants to be." I told him about the quiet parts of widowhood I never managed to translate for other people, the way every task becomes 2 tasks, the thing itself and the reminder that you're doing it alone. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it rest between us, a third presence we both acknowledged. Back in the room, he set my bag on the luggage rack and took the chair by the window. I sat on the edge of the nearest bed and slipped off my shoes. The rain had softened to a hush, tapping the glass like a polite guest. The TV remote lay untouched on the dresser, face up like a remote always looks when all it can offer you is noise. "Barbara," he said after a while, "I want to say something plain." He lifted his eyes, steady as a level. "You don't owe me anything for being here." "I know," I said, and I did. But a lifetime of owing made my throat work slowly. Still, I'm grateful. "Me too," he said, "for your company more than anything." Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the way the room held us together without pressing us closer. I told him about my husband's laugh, how it used to roll through our house like warm thunder, and how, when it vanished, the walls seemed to forget what to do with themselves. I told him I had built a life out of small, stubborn tasks, finding the cheapest gas, changing my own porch light, talking to the cashier about her day, so I didn't forget how the world sounded when it answered back. My voice shook, not because I was broken, but because I was finally allowing someone to hear where the mending had left the seams. He listened. He asked gentle questions. He offered his own story in return, not to make it even, but to make it human. A marriage that didn't survive 2 people growing at different speeds, a daughter who lives 3 states away and sends him pictures of her garden. "I used to think," he admitted, "that life was mostly about fixing things. Lately I think it's about noticing what holds, even after." We sat like that until the rain let up. Then he stood and the chair made a soft scraping sound that felt like a musical cue. He came to the bed and stopped at a careful distance, his hands hanging open at his sides, palms showing. All the wordless ways a man can say, "I will not take," only ask. "May I sit?" he asked. "Yes," I said, patting the bedspread beside me. The polyester rasped under my hand. Familiar, harmless, hotel-scented. "I don't want to rush anything," he said. "If this is nothing more than 2 neighbors waiting out a bad night, that's all right with me. But if it's the beginning of, I don't know, a better conversation, then I won't pretend I don't hope for that." I answered by doing the smallest brave thing I could think of. I slid my hand onto his. His skin was warm and a little rough, like a book cover that's been read and loved. He turned his palm to catch mine as if he'd been waiting with the door open, lights on, soup warming on the stove. We didn't kiss then. We didn't need to. I leaned my shoulder into him and felt the line of his arm, a quiet architecture. He asked if I was comfortable. I nodded. He asked if I wanted him to stay in the chair. I shook my head. The room exhaled. There is a kind of intimacy that belongs to people who have already survived their worst day. It isn't fireworks, it's a porch light. We lay back on top of the covers, two grown people obeying a curfew neither of us had to keep. He told me a story about a cherrywood hope chest he once made for a young couple who insisted on helping him sand it. They were so careful, he said, smiling into the ceiling. They thought they were fixing the wood. Really, the wood was fixing them. And tonight, I asked, what's fixing us? Maybe the noise of the world taking the night off, he said. Maybe plain kindness. Maybe the way your laugh finds a place to land. The clock flashed 12:41. I thought of my flooded hallway, of how water finds the lowest place and fills it. Grief does that too. So does comfort. Maybe the trick isn't to hold it back, but to build a channel worth flowing through. I told him so. He squeezed my hand once, slow, like punctuation. When I grew drowsy, I reached for the bedside lamp and paused. Stay, I said. Please. On the other bed. Saying it felt like stepping onto a new floor, still mine, but newly polished. Of course, he said, and there was no disappointment in it, only respect that felt like a blessing said in a language older than either of us. He pulled the spare blanket from the closet and tossed it over the second bed, then checked that the chain lock was latched. I watched the simple choreography of care and felt safer than I had in a long time. The night made its small hotel noises, the elevator at the far end, the distant mirth of strangers arriving late, the sigh of plumbing. Sleep came for me in soft waves. Once, in the near dark, I heard him shift and say my name, a question without ask. I answered with a drowsy yes that meant I'm all right. I'm here. Keep resting. He did. Morning arrived the way good news does, quietly. The rain had rinsed the world and left it shining. We walked to the lobby for coffee that tasted better for being shared. He handed me a little carton of creamer and one of those stirrers that looks like a tiny oar. We sat by the window where the willow shook its wet hair. My hands felt empty without his, so I wrapped them around the cup and let the heat stand in. What now? I asked, feeling the way a question can stretch a day into a path. Now, he said, we call a real plumber, air out your place, and take it one task at a time. And if you'll let me, I'll be there for each one. He hesitated. I don't have a perfect plan, Barbara, but I can promise you this. I won't disappear when the work gets quiet. We drove back to my house. The hallway smelled like rain and dust, but the damage looked less apocalyptic in daylight. He opened windows, rolled up rugs, and showed me how to angle fans so the air could do its patient work. The plumber came, assessed, and scheduled the repair. Practical things marched into order like well-trained soldiers. But the truth is, the most important thing had already been repaired, and it hadn't required a toolbox. Standing in my kitchen, I felt the place in me that had been waiting, patient, stubborn, almost afraid to be seen, show its face in the mirror above the sink. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked like a woman saying yes to her own life. William wiped his hands and turned as if he'd heard the same quiet shift. Let me take you to dinner tonight, he said, almost shy. Nothing fancy, just to mark the day. I looked at the patched drywall, the fans whirring, the morning light making patterns on the floor through the new pane, the one he'd installed last week that had started this whole drift of events. Yes, I said, on one condition. He raised an eyebrow, the boyish gesture of a man surprised to find hope feels good in his bones. Name it. We keep what made last night good, I said. The carefulness, the asking, the truth. He nodded, the kind of nod that seals a pact. Deal. The hotel receipt lay folded in my purse like a pressed leaf from a new season, proof that we hadn't dreamed it. Outside, the day peeled open, ordinary and generous. The flooded hallway would dry. The walls would remember. And the next time the wind rattled my windows, I knew I wouldn't brace myself alone. On his way out to the truck, he paused on the porch and looked back at me. Not with the hunger of a man rushing toward an ending, but with the steadiness of someone willing to build a beginning. 7 o'clock? He asked. 7, I said, and I caught my reflection in the glass he'd helped me measure and set. A woman with a soft cardigan, a steadier pulse, and eyes that had decided to stay open.